It's the run to the line. Workman's off the track. He's got all 4 Michelin's over the white line. He's defending.
Everything interesting happens off the racing line.
And welcome to the very first episode of Off the Racing Line, a podcast about what really happens on and off the racetrack and what happens when things don't go as planned. So I know you guys are wondering why the name, why Off the Racing Line. If you've ever raced, you know the phrase. The racing line is holy. It's the fastest way around the racetrack. When you come off of it, that's when stuff happens. You find the marbles, uncertainty, chaos. But that's also where you find some great opportunities and some great stories. I am your host, Carlos Espitia, with my co-host, Mike Moore. And today we are kicking off things with someone who absolutely represents the embodiment of this show, my good friend, David Maher.
That's a hell of an intro.
David's a seriously good driver, the former U.S. coast-to-coast speed record holder, the 2024 FARA Super Lap Series SL1 champion, and a guy with some incredibly wild stories. So we want to definitely get into those right now. This episode, we're going to dive into instructor war stories, the art of coaching, and a segment I like to call The One That Got Away. Stories of almost glory. David, so anyways, we're going to get into it.
All right, let's go.
David, welcome to the show. It's great having you here.
Thanks for having me.
So for those of you listening, David Maher has been in the motorsports world for about 20 years, right?
Sure.
He started out tracking and racing up in New York at Watkins Glen, and he's been coaching and instructing ever since. The wildest part, well, one of the wildest stories that I like for your stories, is back in 2006, David was one of the co-drivers who broke the Cannonball coast-to-coast speed record, New York to LA, in 32 hours and 7 minutes.
That's incorrect. That was the record that we broke.
Oh.
31 hours and 4 minutes was my time. We broke a 23-year-old record that was set in 1983 in a red Ferrari 308.
So what was your time then?
31 hours and 4 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah.
You seem to have that committed to memory.
You know, It's one of those things in life that tends to stick.
So one of my favorite parts of that story is that you guys did it in an absolutely amazing car, the BMW E39 M5.
The last of the best M5s.
Yes. So here's a really great story about that I would like to share with you guys. Back in 2007, 2008, when I was just starting my HPDE venture, and I had an E46 M3 at the time. I was at a bookstore where you could still go to a bookstore at that time, and I was looking for books about how to drive faster and things like that. And I happened to see the book on the shelf, this one here, and what caught my eye was the M5 on the cover. I said, well, let me take a look at this. I picked it up, kind of read through it real quick. I said, illegal racing, coast to coast, like this is for me. Let me read it. I took it home and I loved it. I read it from cover to cover. Fast forward about 15 years later, I'm hosting the very first track event that I've hosted at PBIR. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
You were invited as a guest instructor, and I kept hearing people asking me, who's that guy in the blue E46 M3? I'm like, why? What's the matter? Well, he's kind of wild. Well, what's going on? Well, he's kind of kissing walls with his rear bumper and this nice sideways. So I made it a point to go over where you were. Like, I don't know who this guy is, and I don't know if he's just a young, crazy guy. I went over there, and that's when I met you. And just down to earth, just really laid back. And I'm like, okay, I guess he's fine. 2 months later, I was asked to instruct at the Ferrari Club of America annual event at Sebring. I go there, and sure enough, I meet David there again. It was like destiny that him and I were going to become friends. We exchanged numbers, and after the event, I'm leaving, and sure enough, I look in front of me, and there's David in his yellow Ferrari. So I called him up. I'm like, hey, man, where are you headed? And he's like, I'm going down to Delray. I'm like, no kidding. I live in Delray, so let's just caravan. Good. So we're heading down. About an hour later, David calls me, and he's like, hey, man, I got to stop by What was that shop we stopped?
Orbit.
Orbit.
Yeah.
The Ferrari was making like funny noise, or something was going on with the car. What happened?
Yeah, so it was having a little bit of it was missing just a little bit, and it turned out the timing was off just a hair. So I'll let you finish the rest of the story, but
So he's like, hey, do you mind if I just drop the car off, and can you give me a ride home? I'm like, well, we both live in Delray. That's not a big deal. So I said, sure. We dropped the car off at Orbit. He jumped in the car. We start sharing stories, and he just kind of drops this bomb of the Cannonball Run record, and he just keeps going on a different story. And I was like, whoa, wait a second.
Circle back to
yes,
that.
what happened there? You broke the speed record? He's like, yeah, back in 2006. I was like, in what car? In the M5. I was like, no, you didn't. I was, I thought I was being cheeky because I read the book, and you were not in this book. So I told him, I'm like, listen, I have the book. You were not in the book. He's like, yeah, I was. He said, look, when you go home after you drop me off, go home, look at the book. And so sure enough, I dropped him off. I run in, open the book, look at the pictures. I was like, holy shit, that's David Maher right there. Anyways, that's how you and I essentially started becoming like really good friends. It kind of spiraled from that point.
That was date one of the bromance.
Yes. But so now, David, you're part of a huge project with P1 Motor Club, a private motorsports country club opening in Port St. Lucie in 2026.
that's the plan, is to have cars driving on track in February 2026. Yeah, it's an awesome facility. They own 650 acres, which is approximately a square mile. They're building two FIA, 2 or 3 certified racetracks. One of them is 4.5 miles long, and it has elevation loops under itself, and then that track's 4.5 miles, so they can run that track 2.25 mile tracks concurrently if they need to. That's the member track, the P1 track, and then the Gold Coast track is going to be a 3.2 mile track, another FIA cert track, which they will be able to hold races on. And it's also a big country club facility. They're offering residences, which you can homestead. It's really going to be awesome. It's going to be one of the first real purpose-built racetracks with all the right runoff and banking and elevation. And I feel like the tracks we drive mostly are a retired airfield, Sebring, and an oval and an infield, either Daytona or Homestead. And the oval infield tracks, I don't know. I used to drive at Pocono in the Northeast, and it was just never my favorite. It was always like the first track event of the year, and you just go there, just kind of shake off the cobwebs. But the track experience was not quite the same as like a Watkins Glen or a purpose-built track like New Jersey Motorsports Park or even Lime Rock. So
Right.
now we're going to have that here in Florida, which is awesome.
And FARA is supposed to be one of the first racing clubs that's going to be racing at P1 in 2026.
Yeah, it's all happening. They've broken ground. They're moving shovels. They're moving dirt. They've excavated the whole thing, and they're also going to have a karting track and a cross car track, which is actually, I think, probably going to be the most fun for people who are into racing. It's sort of off road, sort of on road, catch air, roll cage and all that, and a little yeah. So anyway, there's going to be a lot of cool things happening there.
We are definitely privileged. I think Florida has 11 tracks. In Florida, and some of those are just major tracks.
Yeah, but even we used to have PBR right nearby, and it was great because it was so close. But again, the track was flat and it was short, and it got boring quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't think this track with the different configurations they can run, and just running a 4.5 mile track, that's like not anything into. I mean, Sebring is pretty long, but Sebring will chew your car up, And
I think the elevation changes is something that's going to be very different for us Florida drivers that are not used to that.
For sure.
Even if it's minor, we're not used to that.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it makes tracks a lot better. I've raced, tracks up and down the East Coast and Canada and California, and having the elevation is fun to get some of that momentum and the extra grip going down and lightening the car when you're going over a rise. It makes for a really good driving experience.
So you mentioned it's going to be roughly 10 miles of private racetrack, essentially replacing the traditional golf course model with the motorsports experience. We're starting to see more of these high-end driving-focused clubs popping up across the country. Why do you think this model is catching on, and what kind of enthusiasts does it attract?
Well, listen, it's getting harder and harder to find fun places to drive your car on the road these days. And, the way things are going, a lot of electric cars and autonomous driving cars, I think, eventually racetracks might be kind of the last place to really go experience what cars can do. And down here in Florida, the driving is straight roads and no turns. And, so getting on track for us, track-focused people, like, this is a place where we can do all the things we like to do with our cars. And I think there's a need for that, and there's a lack for that. And, roads are getting more dangerous, and racetracks are a safe place to go experience what your car can do.
I think you nailed a couple points that I think the cars are becoming faster and faster. The roads are, I think, littered with people that are just not focused on driving. They're focused on just about everything else but
Sure.
driving. And so where can you actually, enjoy, a high horsepower car, whether it be a BMW, Porsche,
Low
Ferrari.
horsepower cars are fun too on the track.
Of course. But they're going to they're going to, I think, get you in less trouble on the street.
For sure. The cars are so capable these days. I mean, to get maximum performance, even out of a Cayman these days, I mean, you got to be breaking the law so violently to.
I took a little bit of offense to your even.
No,
the Cayman
but I'm
there,
just
by the
like,
way, David.
Hey, get a GT4 and forget it. By the time you're experiencing the limits on that car, and even the base
Oh, yeah.
models are so
No,
good.
no.
That's what I'm saying. It's not a dig in any way, but even the base models are so good. You got to be going so fast
Yep.
to experience the limits of these cars. And, there's not a turn on the roads down here to
Yeah.
experience that. And all these cars are the most fun in the turns.
Yep.
I've always been a BMW guy when I started, doing track days, and I think it was Porsche of Naples did one of those programs where they allow you to test drive their new Porsches at Homestead. I remember I drove the Carrera S around Homestead, and by the time I was finishing the first lap, my thought was, this is a cheater car. It is so easy to drive this car. It's not even. It's not even fair.
I have a funny story about how I ended up a Porsche guy. I had been instructing for a while in my previous track car. My first track car, my first track car was a Corvette. We won't talk about that. My second track car was a 2012 Golf R, and I love that little car. You could fit all the
So fun.
parts, four wheels and tires in the back. Jack the whole. So I just go to the track by myself, swap brake pads, swap tires. So I had a buddy of mine that was living in the Northeast, and he had come down and he was driving Sebring for the first time. So very capable driver, but just, didn't know the track. It's obviously very long and complicated. So I said, I'll hop in the right seat with you, ride around for 15 minutes and, you'll be good to go after that. So we hop in the car. He does sort of one warm-up lap, and we come through turn 1 and then down into turn 3. And I was just getting ready to say, too hot to get him to slow down. He turned in, the car went right around the corner, and I thought to myself, there is no way my little Volkswagen will ever do that. And I promise you this, I got out of the car and started shopping for a Porsche. And that's how I ended up with Porsche. I was just like, my chassis will simply not do this, so that is how I became a fan. So yes, to your point, very easy to drive.
Yes, it's a fantastic car. Let's shift gears for a minute and talk about something that doesn't get enough credit in this world, the art of coaching. Being a good instructor isn't just about riding right seat and giving commands. It's about understanding your student, adapting to their needs, and sometimes going way beyond what's expected. A good coach doesn't just help you drive better. They look after you and on and off the track. Now, David, you and I were talking about an experience that you had maybe a year ago with
Not too
FADA.
long ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So walk me through that, where you actually went well out of your way for this one student that showed up unprepared at Sebring for his first track day.
Coming into the last turn, 16, it was fine. Then going back out into 1 again, the brakes faded and we went way deep. And I was like, I don't know how many laps we can handle in this thing before we wind up in a wall. So let's just bring this thing in and take a look at where the brake pad situation is. Brake is like, did you change the brakes? Did you change the fluid? He's like, yeah, well, I had the fluid changed. But, it was a car that, he was probably light on brakes, and he was running street pads, and he just kind of didn't know all these things. So to his credit, maybe the pads were down to a third, but maybe it was just street compound on an older car that wore out quickly. I don't know. I didn't fully inspect them before.
Right, he didn't realize that he was going to go through a third of the pads.
Sure. So anyway,
2 sessions or a session.
And this poor guy smoked his brakes, and he was down to the backing plates on the rear brakes of the car too. So I was like, man, you know, and that was after the first session on the first day of a 3-day weekend. And I was like, well, this might be a long, expensive, painful experience for you, learning experience for you to figure out. You got to make sure all this stuff is done. But, you know, to his credit, you know, it was the first track day. You don't know how quickly you're going to wear through stuff. And, you know, you might have looked at it and thought it was fine. But anyway, you know, the poor guy, I hated to see him, you know, ruin his whole weekend by, you know, not having pads on his car. So, I mean, we did everything. I called AutoZone with the guy, and he thought he found a set of them. And, you know, I ran him out to the AutoZone, and we picked up some stuff, some pads and some fluid, and we're going to bleed him a little bit. I happened to have a bleeder with me and let him borrow tools and all of those things. And it's not necessarily an instructional thing that I would do all the time, but this guy was just such a nice guy, and he was so into it. And he was a competent driver for having never been on the track. So I wanted to maximize his experience for him, and I want him to come back to events like this, because these are the people, you know, the first timers that get excited about it, tell their friends about it, and bring people back. So you want to make sure they have a really good experience. And I went above and beyond what, you know, most instructors or even I would do with, you know, a different student. You know, maybe somebody older didn't care so much, or, you know.
So I think there are two takeaways from that story. Number one, please show up, you know, with an adequate amount of, you know, tires and brake pads. Make sure your car is going to go to war, unlike you've ever seen it go through before. And then number two, I think we're talking about what makes a good instructor is understanding when you have to go beyond the call of duty, and understanding that, you know what, this guy, like you said, this guy, nice guy, I don't want his weekend to be over. Let's see if we can find you some brake pads and see if we can get the car back out there again. So I think that's what makes, one of the things that makes a really good instructor is that you care about the student and the experience that they have, especially being their first experience. Mike, what do you think?
And you know, and that guy did come back too. I mean, he signed up for another event, and he's like, he was upset that he didn't have me the next time, and I didn't realize that he had signed up. But anyway.
Yeah, and I will say that it's not just instructors, right? It's just track people in general are like, it's hard, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that won't lend you, you know, a jack or a screwdriver or something. Generally speaking,
so true.
Track people really stick together. It's a brotherhood, a sisterhood. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've had people that, you know, just were in the garage next to me that saw me struggling early in my career.
Sure.
I didn't have any idea what I was doing, right? We've all been there. Everybody started at some point in time their first track day.
Right.
Didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. They were ill prepared. So we've all been there. So yeah, the overwhelming majority of my best friends today are all people that I met at the track.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had that experience too. Even one of my first track days down here is with you and our buddy John, and I got a puncture in my tire, and he had a, you know, tire patch kit, and he patched that, put air back in the tire, and I ran a track day with a plugged tire, but, you know, it got me through the rest of the day. And I find that too with, you know, the racing that we do, and you walk through the paddock if you need something, you need a jack, you need a jack stand, you need, you know, fluids, or, you know, there's always somebody there willing to help.
And I think that's one of the things that's very, I think, comforting as you approach maybe somebody that's listening to this, wants to go to their first track day, that it is so welcoming. You know, like you guys mentioned, anybody is willing to, you know, lend you a tool if you forgot. There's chances are if you're showing up to the track for your first track day, you're going to forget something. And
ask enough people in the paddock, and chances are you'll find it somewhere, right?
Yeah. And people are willing to just get out of the car and like, hey, let's fix this right now. I love that. Mike, let me ask you this. What's the most satisfying moment you've ever had as a coach or instructor?
You know, it's, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say that it was instructing my wife all the way from her very first track day at Sebring all the way up to now an intermediate blue group driver.
Some people would say that could be, you know, hit or miss.
Well, you know, yes, I figure if our marriage survived that, it can survive anything.
Yes.
Right? And I have to tell you that my favorite thing about that was, and you know, all the married men out there will appreciate the story. I told everybody for 2 hours a day, I get to yell at my wife, and she had to do exactly what I was saying.
Yes.
So that was personally, that was a very rewarding experience. But no, actually, it was great. You know, I took her out for. She was played sports in high school. You know, so I knew that she had the competitive bug. So I bought her, a track day for her birthday one year, and thought it was a Saturday, a 2-day event. I was there instructing, so I said, I'll instruct you on Saturday, and fully expected to go out there and for her to be like, oh yeah, that was fun, had a good time. And we didn't even get to lunch on Saturday before she said, can I sign up for tomorrow too? And I thought to myself, I didn't really factor all these extra consumables into this one-time birthday present that she got. But fast forward 5 years, she's out there solo, mixing it up with the rest of the guys.
Nice.
That's amazing. I've always heard there's a few things you don't teach your wife.
Yes.
And one of them is skiing, the other is driving, and the other one is sex.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Those are things you're not supposed to coach on.
I'll just comment that she's home with a broken arm from skiing, and I'm not
Yes.
going to comment on the other
Okay.
topics. We'll just leave that alone.
Covered 2 of the 3. Right on. Okay, let's transition over to a question that I really want to ask both of you. Have you ever coached someone who genuinely thought should not be on the track? Like, this person doesn't belong on the racetrack. And I know it's counterintuitive to what we're trying to do, which is
Right.
get people to the track.
Right.
But some people are just not cut out for that. Have you guys ever had experience like that?
I mean, I will say that the overwhelming majority of people that join us don't understand how hard it is to do this, right? It's very difficult. Fortunately, the only person that I really had that I genuinely was concerned about, fortunately, they were on the too conservative side, which I often find is the case. Even if you find somebody that show up, high horsepower car, type A personality, they think that they sort of know it all. I generally find those people, like one lap in, they have checked their ego very quickly
Yes.
because they realize how difficult it is. So the only time that I truly felt this person doesn't belong on the track, fortunately, they figured that out themselves. So we had gone out for the first sort of 30-minute warm-up session, standing yellow, just learning. That was it. They packed up after the 30-minute warm-up session under full
Really?
course yellow with no passing.
So they never got up to speed.
I don't think we ever got over 85 miles an hour. Somebody had gotten them this as a present, so they were sort of pseudo interested in it. They weren't super passionate about it. They just wanted to drive their 911 on the track. They drove the 911 on the track. They checked out, and there was a little bit of relief there because it would have been a long day.
Okay, I'm curious. Like, did you have a conversation with him afterwards? Like, what could have happened that prompted him to just say, this is not for me?
I think because it was somebody else had gotten them this for a present and they didn't realize just what it was. I think maybe they thought it was one of the more along the lines of just an experiential thing where you're going to go out there and it's going to be nice and
like parade
calm
laps.
and relax. Right, exactly. Parade laps, or they're going to spend most of the time in the passenger seat,
Right.
and just learn a little bit. I don't think that they realized what it was that they had purchased, and they quickly realized that it was not for them.
Interesting.
I've had a couple of those too. I became an instructor with the Porsche Club and went through their whole thing up in Watkins Glen, and there was always a term for the students who just didn't have it or weren't going to get it, and OSB, which is other sports beckon. And I've definitely had a few of those. I was instructing at New Jersey Motorsports Park back in 2008, and Greg Andretti, who was Mario Andretti's nephew.
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he was trying to put together a little Ferrari driving driver's ed program, and I had an older gentleman, and he had a beautiful, which was pretty new at the time in 2008. A 430. It was a coupe, but it had a manual transmission, which is rare in that car. And this guy just thought he could hit the gas pedal everywhere and didn't really understand that he needed to use the brakes. And after the third off on the out lap, I was terrified. Yeah. And what's surprising is now I've been doing this for almost 20 years, instructing, how few times I actually run into students that are like that. Most people are super coachable, and most people don't want to wreck their car. You know, some people don't get it as quick as others, but that guy was definitely OSB. And I just had a conversation. I said, "You got to bring this car in." I said, I've warned you, you know, each time, and you know, just I'm like, but I'm worried for my safety here. This isn't going to end well for you or me or the car. So I say you got to bring it into the pits and find a different instructor. You know, maybe somebody else can communicate with you better. But he was just out there, just Yahoo gas pedal, you know, just like straight over hill, right? Like trying to wrangle this poor car in, and I was just like, oh, here we go off again, bouncing through the grass. I'm like,
just
oh,
overdriving and not interested in learning how to drive.
Yeah, just not paying any attention to what I was saying, and you know, I was also going back even before that. I was up at Watkins Glen, and my first track car was a 1979 930 turbo, the old Widowmaker, and all I did was, you know, remove weight and add horsepower to that car. But
Perfect.
Yes,
Excellent recipe for disaster.
I went up there because my mom had bought a 1999 Carrera for, you know, Tiptronic or whatever they were back at the time. And I was like, Mom, let's do a track day together. And I went out in her run group at one point, and she was just a moving chicane. The guy was like, you could drive faster on an exit ramp than you've been driving around any one of the turns here. Is like, yeah, it just wasn't working for her, but she tried. So my mom was definitely one of those OSB people.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a great segue for our next segment, which I'm really excited about. This is going to be, I believe, the cornerstone to the show. It wouldn't be Off the Racing Line without a little chaos. This next segment is called Instructor War Stories. Three of us have talked about what this segment is about, so we're going to jump right into it. Mike, I'm going to start with you. In over 10 years of instructing, I know you've got a vault of insane moments, but if you had to pick one that still lives rent-free in your mind, which one would that be?
You know, the majority of my insane moments have been self-inflicted with me behind the driving, me in the driver's seat. To be perfectly honest with you, I've been very fortunate in that my most sort of problematic experiences sitting in the right seat have always been people that were just too conservative, right?
Really?
Like they wouldn't, you know, like I said, it's a hard thing to do, right? To get somebody at, you know, coming through a blind corner to roll back on the throttle when you can't see the exit, and to go all the way out to that rumble strip and use the entire track. You know, that's the only way you're going to get around the track fast, right? So the majority of my, you know, I wouldn't even call them war stories, are all more tied to people that simply wouldn't push as hard as they were capable of. You know, I tell everybody when I'm sitting in the right seat, I'm not going to tell you to do anything that I don't know that you and the car will do. Now, whether you're willing to do that or not is entirely up to you. So if you tell me, hey, Mike, I'm not really interested in doing that because I think you're a crazy person, that's fine. You know, I'm there to get us around the track as fast as possible in a safe manner. So, you know, sitting in the right seat, I'm certainly not going to tell somebody to do something that's going to put me, them, or their car in jeopardy.
Mike, I really appreciate you completely letting us down on this segment that I was totally hyping up. Appreciate that.
Well, I knew you'd be, you know, a little bit disappointed, but you know, like I said,
little bit.
I you know, knock on wood, I've been very fortunate. My horror stories are. I was down at Homestead one time, and the overwhelming majority of them, you know, thankfully fall into this category. I was down at Homestead one time. Had a guy had come out with a Audi TTRS. It was relatively brand new. I can't remember what, probably like 2018-ish maybe. And from my vantage point in the right seat, I could look over, and they had, you know, the digital dashes that had already become popular at that point in time, and he had it customized to that, the gigantic gauge that I could see from my side was throttle input, right? Mm-hmm. So we come down, and, you know, we down into the infield, you know, 2 through 2, 3, 4. Coming out of 5, right? You can roll back on the throttle there, and this guy's all proud. Car had like 600 miles on it. He was all excited about it. So, you know, we get down to the apex there of 4. He starts to track out, and I say, okay, go. And I can see out of the corner of my eye the throttle input, and literally the gauge is like 1%, 4%. I'm like, go, 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 go. 7%.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like,
The
come
snooze
on, man.
fest.
Like, you want to trade seats with me? Like, I would love to pilot this thing around
Yeah.
there and see what it's capable of. Great handling car, right? You know, all-wheel drive. Like, it was going to take a lot to get in trouble with that car. And yeah, he just would not do it. So yeah, I hate to disappoint you, but it won't be the first or the last time.
All right. No, I know. Thanks, Mike. I do have one. I have a story
Please.
that I would like to share with you guys and our audience. Homestead as well. This was, oh my goodness, back in 12, 13 years ago, one of Henry Gilbert's events, back when he owned Hooked on Driving. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be a night event. So when we went out there with our students, it was I would say, the sun was just starting to set. It was still daylight, but, you know, it was starting to set. There were some shadows. We go out there, and my guy's just, you know, he's it seems like he's not listening to me, but he's not all there. So I remember distinctively still going into turn 6, you know, the horseshoe, and he's going relatively slow. He takes the turn and he goes way too wide, and now we're on the left-hand side on the dirt, and we're kind of bumping. We're doing 30 miles an hour or something.
I was going to say, not a great place to do that, but at 30 miles an hour, you were
like
fine.
30 or 40. We're bouncing around. I'm like, hey, not a big deal. I'm looking over. I'm like, not a big deal, man. Just, you know, put it back on the track. And, you know, we're still bumping, you know, we're still doing our thing. And I look over, I'm like, hey, it's fine, you know, 'cause I see him fixated on the wall. It's like staring at us now. And I look at him, and he's just like this, right? And I'm like, hey, it's fine. Just
Right.
get it back
A
on the
little bit
track.
to your right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, I'm like yelling at him now. And so I like, one of the only times I think that I've ever grabbed the wheel, like I actually grabbed it, pulled it back in, and again, we're doing 30 miles an hour.
Right.
And so I'm kind of concerned at this point, right? Because he's not answering me at all. So I said, listen, I don't know what's going on. Like, you're not responding to me. You're not answering me. I don't know if you could hear me. He goes, I can hear you. I'm like, okay, well, why don't we go into the pits and have a little conversation? Because I don't know what's going on. So we go around, we go into the pits, you know, he puts the car in park. I'm like, so I kind of looked over at him like, okay, what's going on? What's up? And he looks at me, and I still remember the expression. He says to me, I can't see. What? What are we doing on a racetrack? And you can't see. This was a Mustang GT. And I remember I was like, okay, well, this is the end of your day and my day.
Yes.
Because we're not going back out there.
No,
So that was my, one of my worst stories. Dave, you got one?
You know, probably the worst one I had was that guy in that Ferrari was probably one of the worst. But you know, like Mike said, I hate to disappoint, but you know, a lot of I've never had a student wreck his car, but I wrecked my own car. So you know, that these things happen on track. You know, to me, some of the most frustrating stuff is like when you're coming out of a turn and the guy's in a higher horsepower car that doesn't know how to drive all that well, and you say, hey, check your mirrors, you got some traffic behind you, and they just don't know what to do, or they mash on the gas pedal and try and you know like we're not out here to drag race down the straightaways, but there's a lot of people that think that, and that sometimes gets frustrating when guys are just like, we know you have the faster car, but he's the faster driver, and you gotta let people through. That's how this operation works. We're not racing. We're learning how to drive, and nobody's learning how to drive if you're holding them up through all the turns and just mashing it on the straightaway. So, you know, you're always going to have those students, and you just try and, you know, once they figure out, okay, well, there's people out there in slower cars, older cars that are way quicker than me, know how to get around quicker than me, and be like, we're going to figure out how to get as fast as them. And so those are some of the things that, you know, just get frustrating over time, that, you know, you always get a new guy out there who just, first time out, just wants to mash the gas pedal on his car and go, and doesn't know how to ease in the brakes and ease off the brakes and get those transitions to the turn. So those are things I like to try and encourage and work on, be like, hey, let's some of these guys go, and then we'll figure out how to catch up with them.
Right, follow them. You may learn something.
And so that's hardly a war story, but those are things that keep coming up, and those are things that you just that make everybody else's track day better too. If you know, everybody's enjoying that flow and going at their own pace.
And super rewarding when that light comes on and they finally figure out Oh, okay.
More fun to chase
right,
that faster
yeah,
car and
right.
see what they're doing that I'm not. So.
Sure. You know, Farah, we're getting ready to launch our instructor school. And so in the instructor school, one of the roles to, for senior instructors to play a mentor, and we're doing our role playing on the track. That person that you mentioned that just smashes the throttle because I have a higher horsepower car, I love to embody that person when I'm playing. I'm being the mentor and I'm doing the driving, and the candidate is playing the instructor. And so I do that on purpose because you see it almost at every single track day. You'll find somebody that's just, that Miata, I don't know how he got there, but I'm definitely faster, so he's not getting around me. And so I verbalize that as I'm playing the student. I'm like, the instructor says, hey, we got a guy behind us. We should let him pass. And I'm like, no.
Throttle.
Yeah. And I like to pick on the Mustangs just because, I don't know, it's fun. And I'll say something like, Mustangs, this car is way faster than a Mustang, and Mustang drivers are dumb. So I am not going to let him pass.
Some Mustang fans here.
No, of course. It's the embodiment that I like to take. But
I do have one final war story, and I can thank Mike for this one. We were had a Farah track day, and there was a guy there all suited up in his race suit and had his GT3 RS there, and he had brought his own instructor, and wasn't clearly playing by the rules. And I said, hey, Dave, we need to do a checkout ride with this guy. It's the end of the day, and it's like, 5 o'clock, and I wanted to get home. And what day was it? It was like, I feel like there was something, maybe it was like, that was Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I think it was Super Bowl Sunday. Yeah, it was that day.
Yeah.
And I get in the car with this guy, and his English was very, very sparse. And I give him the radio so I could talk to him. I said, can you hear him? And he kind of nods his head. And we go back out there and run down the front straight. And he's like half pedaling, like past start finish at this point. And he's like, I can't see. And I'm like, the sun isn't that low in the sky. It's not that deep in your eyes. And then I was like, okay, could you point out the corner workers for me? And he goes, I can't hear you. I said, well, you heard me if you heard me say that. And it was like in his broken English. And I said, I just want you to point out some corner workers. And then never pointed out one. And, going into 6, 7 and going around, he was just like 30 miles an hour in a GT3 RS. I'm like, I could do laps around this guy in an E30 if I had to, and it was very difficult to communicate with him, and he was not listening to anything I said, whether he could hear me or not. I knew he could hear me, but he just couldn't understand me. But sure. I said, let's bring this in. Like it's late. You're not getting it, and he did not get checked out.
So that's actually a success story. I'll brief you on that one.
Okay.
So he ends up coming back at the following event with Farah, and we give him one of our instructors. He's one of more senior instructors, and I remember I went up to him and I said, "How's it going? How's the day going?" And he's like, "Oh man, this is amazing. My instructor is just amazing." Of course, because it's a Farah instructor. Right. He knows how to instruct, rather than somebody that owns the team or something like that. They don't understand how to be an instructor. Sure. So he, by giving him that assignment of an instructor that really wasn't an instructor, right. I think it sort of shortchanged that student. Yeah, by giving him a proper instructor, he had a blast.
Yes,
Sure.
The teachers make all the difference, right?
Yeah.
I've got identical twins at home, and fortunately, they're both very smart. They'll take, they're both taking, calculus or something, and one of them has a great time, the other one is miserable, and it all comes down to the quality of the instruction.
Sure. All right, let's close things out with the last segment that I got in store for us, the one that got away, right? So we're talking about missed opportunities for glory. Now, this could be racing, could be a track day, could be a 1/10 of a second that caused you to come in second place to me.
That was coming.
Dave, we'll start with you. You've been around racing and coaching for decades. What's a moment that still sticks with you as the one that almost went your way but didn't?
Oh man, I got a few here, but as you know, and Mike knows, I've done a lot of the endurance racing with Champ Car and AER and other things. So I've done a ton of racing, all with pretty low quality vehicles, which makes it fun because everybody else has low quality vehicles.
BMWs and things.
Yeah, BMWs,
Okay.
like an E30. But anyway, I was at Watkins Glen, my favorite track, and I had a team of good guys, and we were down to the last 3 laps, and we're running in 6th place in this junker car that I had dressed up like a Laughing Clown malt liquor car, and I found the guy who did the graphics for the car in the movie, and I had the Ricky Bobby race suit and the Jean Girard race suit. We had a whole theme together for the team, and the batteries from our radio went out, and so we just had like a few laps to go. We're running in 6th place, and all we needed to do, we were like way ahead of the guy in 7th place, and we weren't going to catch the guy in 5th place, so we just needed to like take it easy. And one of my teammates, who actually produced the documentary from me racing cross country, the Cannonball Run, he's all by himself, huge gap in front and behind, and going around the off-camber turn 9 at Watkins Glen, wads the thing up in the wall.
Oh,
And
this is towards the end of the race.
this was 3 laps left. We're in 6th place, which top 10 in any one of these
This is
endurance
a
races.
14 hour?
This was they do like a 7, 8 or
Right.
something like that. So it's 3 separate races on different days, and this is the last day, last race, and the car was wadded up, and I was heartbroken. The guy was fine, but that was a tough one. Just to
To swallow.
and it was like they just kind of walked away from the situation, kind of.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate.
That's a tough one because I think especially because it's an endurance race and there's so much that you've already invested, so much time.
To be able to have the car running at the end of the race
Yes.
is a success in
Accomplishment
these
in
things,
itself,
right?
right?
So
Yeah, the goal is just to finish.
yeah, and so and when you're in the top 10, you're like, hey, we got a top 10 finish, and
Yeah.
I've had better finishes and we've finished better, but that one hurt. That one still hurts.
sure.
I missed that car. We had a lot of fun with that car.
I'm sure. Mike, what about you, man? What's the one that got away from you?
Well, this is a loaded question if I ever saw.
Let's hear it.
I carry my 2nd place trophy around with me, as a not subtle reminder of.
Sebring. That was Sebring.
Sebring.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, the same thing happened at Homestead, our first
Yes,
trip there.
yes.
So yeah, it first of all, thank you for getting me involved in FARA, the Super Lap series. I've been doing this for a long time. I was just kind of out there spending money on gas, spending money on brakes, spending money on tires. I had, lost a little bit of that passion. I was getting honestly I was more passionate about coaching at that point in time than I was driving. And then, you introduced me to FARA and to the Super Lap series. So I'm out there running time trials. So I took it so far as I'd gotten rid of one track car that was terribly unreliable. So when I was shopping for my next track car, I was actually putting the stats for a bunch of cars. I did hours of research, days, probably hours is an understatement, making sure that I was going to find a car that was competitive. You need the right car, the right driver, the right equipment, all that stuff. So found a car that I knew to be good, went out there, and first day, lost by 1/10 of a second.
Yeah.
Second day, lost by 1/10 of a second. I was just like, this is brutal.
That second day, remember that I ran, I don't know what it was, whatever it was, and I remember
26, something like
you
that.
were already aiming for that time.
Yes.
And he comes up to me and he says, I got you. And I had gone faster at that
Yes.
moment also by 1/10.
Yes, this was before we had the live scoring.
Yes.
So now I come into I go out, I run my hot lap, I come into the pits, I take out my phone, I just stare at the live scoring, just like, oh, I'm only up by 1/3 of a second. I guess we got to go back out, or oh, good, I've got a
it's
second and a
competition
quarter.
that makes us,
It
gets
truly
us involved
really-
more mentally, and the competitive spirit of this is what makes it fun.
And you took SL1.
I have a different story. I'm running a car that's almost 30 years old, and it's in no way competitive with a 992 GT3 or GT3 RS or some of the other cars there. But Carlos said, hey, you should come out and do this. There's only 2 people registered for SL1. You come out in your car and you bring home a trophy. So I'm like, okay, bring home a trophy. That's cool. And I did it sort of as a lark, just to kind of have fun with it. But then all of a sudden, after a couple more events and a couple more third places,
Find yourself in first
a
place.
second here or there, and
He was in the running.
and then it got down to the very last event of the year, and I got a little bit of a late start in the morning to drive down to Homestead, and they were cleaning up a big wreck. A couple of cars had rolled over, and there's debris all over the turnpike down there, or whatever that road is. And I get to the track, and there's one guy ahead of me, Leo, in a GT4, and the guy is legitimately quick in that car anyway, so there was no way I was going to beat him, so I'm fighting for second place. But I get there, and poor Leo, he had ran over a piece of that debris from the wreck and put a puncture in his transmission. There's transmission fluid all over. And I'm like, I feel horrible for the guy, but I'm chuckling inside because I'm
not
like,
that bad.
Did I just steal SL1 champion from this guy? Because I slept in a little bit too late. Like, that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But, it just goes to show you, hey, keep showing up to these events, keep signing up. And, you might not be the fastest guy every weekend, but, if you're there, you get to bring home the hardware. And, it's fun to get other people to step up their game in these things. Like you guys are saying. So you guys are tenths apart, but, I set a personal best in my car at Sebring this year, chasing around some of the guys in the SL2.
I remember you
group,
saying,
so.
"I'm not going to push it." This is a
Famous
classic
last
car.
words, right.
993 turbo. I'm not going to push it.
Put
Next
Dave
thing I
Maher
know,
on the racetrack and forget I'm
Right.
chasing last times like everybody else.
putting the $200,000 car sideways coming around the turn 1 at Sebring.
Comes in, brakes smoking. I'm not going to push it.
No.
Right.
I remember what I told you. I said, just show up. He's like, I'm not going to be competitive against a GT4. And I told him, and I'll tell everybody else to come out of the Super Lap Series, just show up. Just show up every day. Every time that we have an event, you could come in second, third. You'll still take a trophy home, but it's the accumulation of points, right? And that's ultimately what matters towards the end of the season. And you got to take home the
My belt. I got my
belt,
yeah.
right?
I'm like Hulk Hogan.
I know you're gunning for it this year. You're gunning for that.
All I have to say is that you're very fortunate that I didn't join last season until July because I was coming. I
love the competition.
I resolved my tenth of a second dilemma, and I was coming.
Some people might think that I got out of SL2 to escape you competing against you.
Right.
I was just chasing other competition.
Oh, I don't know. We have that recorded, right? Somebody heard him admit that, right? Okay, we need a sound clip of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys. That's the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Mike, Dave, for joining me. Stay sharp, stay hungry, and remember, everything interesting happens off the racing line. See you next time.
Stripes, the road from dreamer to driver ain't always straight. Kept my head down, fueled by faith. I lost some time, but found my name. Pressure made a diamond out of